Hey guys, tonight we slip into the thick, heavy air of Victorian London, where every step you take seems to stir up another cloud of coal dust. The sky is permanently bruised by the chimneys, and the streets are greasy with soot, smoke, and something you can't quite identify but definitely don't want on your shoes. You probably won't survive this if you have a sensitive nose, but let's pretend for a while that you've adjusted. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And while you're at it, drop a comment telling me where you're watching from and what time it is for you. I always find that fascinating. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You shuffle forward, and immediately your boots find purchase on a slimy mixture of mud, horse manure, and coal ash. This is the pavement of the Victorian era, part industrial runoff, part barnyard floor. Imagine every chimney in your neighborhood belching out black smoke, day and night. That smoke settles on rooftops, windowsills, and laundry lines. If you dared to hang your clean shirts outside, they'd return with fresh soot stripes, a sort of accidental pinstripe pattern nobody really wanted. The smell is worse than the sight. Picture fried onions mingling with horse droppings, fish guts spilled near market stalls, and the sharp tang of coal smoke. And layered on top of that, the human element. Without the marvel of modern plumbing, people toss slop out windows, and chamber pots are emptied into gutters. Streets double as trash bins. You pass by gutters bubbling with thick runoff, half water and half mystery stew. Dogs, rats, and pigs do their best to clean up scraps, but their efforts only add to the chaos. The mainstream historical fact here is that Londoners at mid-century burned millions of tons of coal each year, producing a constant fog so thick that it earned the nickname pea soupers. They weren't exaggerating. Newspapers complained that fog could make midday as dark as midnight, and you might lose sight of your own outstretched hand. The cold haze wasn't just inconvenient, it coated lungs, ruined stone facades, and gave clothing a permanent grayish tint. Soap was a weapon, yes, but it felt more like a losing skirmish against an unstoppable army of grit. You duck down a side street and notice something quirky, a Victorian fad for sprinkling sand across shop floors. It was supposed to soak up mud and keep boots from sliding. But it ended up tracking a kind of grimy powder everywhere else. Imagine trying to keep a bakery clean when half your customers leave trails of gritty sand behind. It's like having a beach vacation, except with more cholera. Historians still argue whether the worst filth came from industry or from overcrowded housing. Both seem like worthy contenders. Entire families crowded into single rooms, with barely any ventilation. Add to that a sea of coal smoke outside and a steady trickle of human waste down alleys, and you've got what polite Victorians called nuisances and modern folks might just call biohazards. You pause and glance at the water pumps. They stand tall and proud, looking like salvation. But everyone knows, or will eventually know, that those pumps are as much threat as blessing. One day, decades later, John Snow will map a cholera outbreak back to a single pump handle on Broad Street, proving that the invisible killer wasn't bad air but tainted water. Until then, though, most folks just keep trudging, believing the miasma, the stinking air itself, was what sickened them. Which makes sense, because if you lived in these streets, you'd believe the stench could kill too. There's a strange comfort, though, in the familiarity of the grime. Coal soot is everywhere, which means everyone wears the same grayish hue. White collars and cuffs, freshly starched, don't stay white for long. It's a losing game, but social pride demands you at least try. Servants scrub steps daily, mothers beat rugs until their arms ache, and children are scolded for coming in muddy, even though mud is half the city's personality, and in the middle of it all, vendors still hawk their wares. The pie sellers, the chestnut roasters, the women selling ribbons. Commerce doesn't stop for dirt, it adapts. One famous oddity of the period was the pure finder, usually women or children who collected dog feces in buckets. Why? Because tanners used it in the leather industry. So yes, while you wrinkle your nose, someone nearby is carrying a profitable bucket of pure to a workshop. Imagine that being your family's bread and butter job. By night, when gas lamps glow through the haze, the air doesn't clear, it thickens. The light turns amber, muffled by smoke, and your breath feels heavier. Clothes smell permanently of coal, and no matter how often you wash your hands, a faint blackness lingers in your fingernails. But oddly enough, Victorians carried on, inventing etiquette to cope with the dirt. A sooty face? Well, that just meant you'd been out working hard. Smudges on hems? Proof you traveled the city. The grime was not only tolerated but woven into the rhythm of daily life. One joke practically writes itself: in a world this dirty, at least no one could accuse you of being messy at home. After all, if your parlor carpet had soot, you could just shrug and blame London. And everyone would nod sympathetically, because their parlor looked the same. As you trudge on, you realize the Victorian street is both a battlefield against dirt and a monument to it. Every new invention, soap advertisements, mechanical street sweepers, even the humble doormat, sprang from this era's obsession with trying, against all odds, to stay a little bit clean. Yet the city itself seemed determined to remind you daily, cleanliness was only ever temporary. You climb the narrow staircase to a cramped tenement room, where a single tin bathtub leans against the wall like an unwelcome guest. It isn't the deep, claw-footed luxury you might imagine from period dramas, it's shallow, dented, and looks suspiciously like it doubles as a laundry tub. Tonight is bath night, or at least it is if your family can be bothered. In the Victorian era, bathing once a week was considered ambitious. Many went far longer. The water wasn't piped in hot and ready, it had to be hauled, bucket by bucket, then heated over the fire. By the time the tub was filled, the steam fogged up the tiny window, and everyone in the family knew it was too much trouble to repeat tomorrow. You lower yourself into the water, bracing against the initial chill, because hot water cools fast in a drafty room. If you're the eldest child, congratulations, you get first dibs. If not, well, you climb into the same cloudy water after your siblings have had their turn. Imagine a murky broth where soap scum mingles with hair, dirt, and whatever mysterious particles were carried in from the coal-slick streets. And yes, the baby probably went last, bobbing in the soup like a dumpling. It wasn't that Victorians didn't want to be clean, they did, but the infrastructure made it nearly impossible. Most houses didn't have indoor plumbing. Public bathhouses existed in larger towns, but they charged a fee. And for a working-class family, pennies mattered. So, the weekly bath was more an aspiration than a strict routine. For day-to-day cleaning, people relied on the quick splash method, a basin of cold water and a flannel cloth, applied to the face, neck, and hands. The rest of the body? Ignored until it couldn't be anymore. The mainstream historical fact here is that until late in the century, soap itself was heavily taxed in Britain. That made cleanliness a luxury good. It wasn't until 1853 that the tax was abolished, and only then did soap become widely affordable. Imagine needing government policy changes just to lather up without guilt. For something a little quirkier, picture this: some Victorians genuinely believed cold baths built moral character. The hydropathy craze saw reformers plunging themselves into freezing water in the belief that it cured laziness, sin, and even diseases. Boarding schools, especially, used cold baths as a kind of discipline. Kids were marched, shivering, into communal tubs at dawn, under the theory that discomfort made them stronger. Spoiler: the kids were not convinced. Historians still argue whether bathing was avoided because of superstition or simple practicality. On one hand, there was the fear that too much soaking opened the pores, letting in disease, a remnant of humoral theory. On the other, water had to be carried, heated, and disposed of, so baths were more labor than luxury. Was it fear, or just exhaustion? Probably both. You glance around the tiny room and notice there's no sense of privacy. Curtains are thin, doors don't always shut properly, and if the bath is in the kitchen, the rest of the family is eating dinner while you scrub. A fire pops in the grate, half boiling the kettle that feeds your bath, and your mother scolds you for splashing too much onto the floorboards. Some families cheated with dry methods. Fuller's earth. A kind of clay, was sprinkled on hair and skin, rubbed in, then brushed out. Think of it as a proto-dry shampoo. It absorbed grease but left a dusty residue that only made you sneeze. And if you were unlucky enough to be truly filthy, you might be sent to a public bathhouse. There, attendants filled great stone tubs, and you paid extra for hot water. The atmosphere was half community center, half industrial steam room. Men and women bathed separately, of course, but gossip floated through the walls. Soap, when available, was harsh and often homemade. Lye-based bars stripped oil so aggressively that skin cracked in winter. Moisturizer wasn't in the budget, so people rubbed on goose grease or lanolin, substances that worked but carried their own farmyard perfume. You leave the tub squeaky but smell faintly like wet sheep. Not exactly alluring, and here comes the joke for the night. In a city where most people only bathed once a week, you weren't the smelly one. You were just average. If you actually washed daily, you'd probably be teased for being fussy or wasteful. Imagine turning up to work freshly scrubbed, only to have your mates squint and ask, "Why re you so clean? Got a date with the Queen?" For the upper classes, things were only slightly better. Wealthy Victorians could afford indoor plumbing by the late 1800s, with taps that delivered warm water straight into elegant porcelain tubs. But even then, habits changed slowly. The idea of bathing for health and relaxation, rather than sheer necessity, took decades to catch on. Many aristocrats clung to perfumes and powders as their first defense against odor. A lavender sachet in a waistcoat pocket was cheaper than remodeling the entire house. By the time you climb out of the bath and wrap yourself in a scratchy towel, the water has cooled to something resembling soup stock, and you eye it with suspicion. It has to be emptied now, bucket by bucket, and someone has to scrub the tub clean enough to double as a laundry bin. You dry off quickly, because the room is drafty and there's no central heating. One gust of cold air and you're shivering harder than you did in the bath. Still, there's a strange ritual comfort in it all. Bath night was often a family affair, predictable as Sunday dinner. The tub squeaks against the floorboards, the fire spits as water heats, and the smell of cheap soap lingers for hours afterward. By morning, the room is back to its usual chilly gloom, the tub is stacked in the corner, and everyone goes about their business, pretending they'll do it all again in exactly a week, though you know it might be 2 or 3. You run your tongue along your teeth, and the sensation is rougher than you'd like to admit. Dental hygiene in the Victorian era wasn't exactly something to smile about. Toothbrushes existed, but they were primitive, bristles made from hog hair jammed into bone or wooden handles. Imagine scrubbing your gums with a porcupine's tail, and you've got the right idea. If you didn't own a brush, you improvised with a cloth, a finger, or even a small stick chewed at the end to make bristles. Toothpaste, as we know it, hadn't really arrived yet. Instead, powders were the rage. You dip your brush, or finger, into a small tin filled with gritty powder and scrub until your gums sting. The ingredients read like a construction site supply list: chalk, crushed brick, powdered charcoal, even soot. Some formulas added salt or baking soda, which sounds sensible, but others threw in cuttlefish bone or powdered slate. Imagine polishing enamel with sidewalk gravel and calling it mint fresh. The mainstream historical fact here is that Victorian dentists began experimenting with fluoride long before it became standard. Early toothpaste advertisements boasted strengthening enamel and preserving the gums, though whether the products actually did much beyond wearing down your teeth is questionable. One of the most popular brands in Britain was Erica Nut Tooth Powder, which stained the mouth reddish and left you looking like you'd been chewing on rusty nails. A quirky tidbit: some people brushed with soot straight from the fireplace. It was cheap, plentiful, and abrasive enough to scrape plaque away. Of course, it also blackened your mouth temporarily, which couldn't have been the look anyone was aiming for. Children sometimes giggled at each other's blackened grins, but adults swore it worked. Historians still argue whether Victorian people actually brushed daily or only on special occasions. Advertisements pushed for regular brushing, but letters and diaries suggest many only reached for their powders before Sunday service or important social events. After all, if you lived in a smoky city where everyone smelled like coal, tooth powder was probably the least of your priorities. Dentistry itself was a terrifying affair. Pain relief was minimal. If you had a rotten tooth, the solution was simple: yank it out. Traveling tooth pullers set up in market squares, offering to extract aching molars with pliers right there on the street. Spectators sometimes applauded, the way you might clap for a street magician. Except the trick involved someone's bloody socket. For wealthier folks, there were dental parlors, where the chairs looked elegant but the pain was the same. Chloroform and laughing gas came into use mid-century, but even then, doses were risky. Too much gas, and you didn't wake up. Too little, and you felt everything. And here's a fun little Victorian irony: sugar consumption skyrocketed during the era. With the empire expanding, sugar became cheap and accessible. Tea was sweetened, puddings became staples, and children devoured boiled sweets by the handful. More sugar meant more cavities, which meant more business for the tooth pullers. The same empire that gave you sugar gave you the need to scream into a leather chair while a man in a waistcoat twisted metal pliers in your mouth. The daily routine, for those who practiced it, went something like this: rinse with cold water, dip brush into powder, scrub until gums bled, spit into a basin, wipe mouth with a handkerchief. Some people finished with a rinse of vinegar or brandy, believing it disinfected the mouth. Brandy probably numbed the nerves a little, which was more than could be said for vinegar, which just stung. The wealthy, always eager to stand apart, commissioned toothbrushes with ivory handles, engraved initials, and bristles trimmed in neat rows. Perfumed tooth powders promised a sweet breath, though the effect was fleeting. Working-class powders came in brown paper packets, often homemade by apothecaries who mixed chalk with whatever abrasive they had lying around. You couldn't miss the difference in quality, but in the end, everyone spat into the same chipped basins. One joke practically tells itself: brushing with soot and chalk doesn't exactly leave you with the dazzling white smile of a toothpaste commercial. More likely, you walked around with teeth resembling weathered gravestones. But given the state of public health, no one expected movie star grins. The goal was survival, not sparkle. By the late Victorian period, companies like Colgate and Maclean's began introducing pastes packaged in jars or even collapsible metal tubes. Imagine the novelty of squeezing paste onto your brush instead of dipping into dusty powder. For many, it was the first time brushing actually felt like a step toward freshness rather than an experiment in masonry. And yet, even as toothpaste modernized, decay still loomed large. False teeth became a booming industry. Ivory, bone, and even real human teeth were fitted into dentures. Grave robbing for teeth, particularly after battles like Waterloo, meant that dentures were sometimes stocked with Waterloo teeth, taken from fallen soldiers. They were considered the highest quality because the soldiers were young and healthy. Imagine sipping tea through a smile full of teeth that once belonged to a French grenadier. Sleep tight with that thought. So, you finish your brushing routine, spit black-streaked foam into the basin, and glance into a cracked mirror. Your gums are raw, your teeth feel smoother. But you can't shake the suspicion that you've just sandpapered enamel off in the name of cleanliness. You dab your mouth with a kerchief, straighten your collar, and head out into the sooty streets, carrying a faint whiff of chalk dust with you. At least, you tell yourself, your smile is respectable enough for church. You step outside again, tugging your coat close against the damp London air, and you feel the sudden, urgent reminder that no part of Victorian daily life revolved more around improvisation than using the toilet. If your stomach rumbled or nature knocked at an inconvenient hour, you didn't exactly have the option of dashing into a clean, tiled bathroom. Instead, your choices ran the gauntlet from chamber pots under the bed to grim outhouses in the back garden, or, if you were in the wrong place at the wrong time, simply the nearest alley. In a cramped tenement, the chamber pot was your constant companion. A round ceramic or metal bowl tucked discreetly under the bed, waiting for its nightly duty. You shuffle across creaky floorboards, lift the lid, and try not to breathe too deeply. In a house where a dozen family members shared space, privacy was as scarce as plumbing. In the morning, someone, often the children or servants, carried the pot down and emptied it into the communal cesspit or gutter. And no, they didn't always do so carefully. You learned quickly to keep an eye out when passing windows, because garde l'eau, French for watch out for the water, wasn't just a quaint phrase. Sometimes the warning didn't come at all, and you'd find yourself with more than raindrops dripping from above. If you lived in a slightly better off home, you trudged to the backyard outhouse. Wooden, drafty, with a hole cut into a bench over a pit. No flush. No seat warmer. Just the whiff of ammonia and damp wood, plus the sound of flies buzzing in the summer heat. You sit, shifting uncomfortably, while the wind sneaks in through the cracks in the boards. Sometimes, lime was tossed in to cut down the smell, but most of the time, the air was thick and unmistakable. The phrase long drop was more literal than poetic. The mainstream historical fact here is that in mid-19th century London, before Joseph Bazalgette's grand sewer system was completed in the 1860s, the Thames itself functioned as one colossal cesspit. Millions of gallons of raw sewage poured into it daily. By the hot summer of 1858, the infamous Great Stink, the river reeked so badly that Parliament was forced to adjourn. Curtains soaked in chloride of lime were draped across government windows, but even then, the stench was unbearable. That crisis finally spurred serious investment in sewers, but until then, Londoners lived with a river that was more brown soup than waterway. Now, for the quirky detail, there was actually an entire profession built around the stuff you'd rather not think about. They were called night soil men. Under cover of darkness, these workers crept through alleys, hauling out the contents of cesspits and privies. They slung barrels, buckets, and carts of human waste, carrying it away for disposal, or resale. Yes, resale. Farmers bought it as fertilizer. Picture that for a moment, the same carts rattling past your window at midnight, slopping over with last week's chamber pots, heading to nourish cabbages in the countryside. Dinner suddenly feels less appetizing. Historians still argue whether the night soil trade was truly efficient or just another health hazard in disguise. Some praise the recycling of waste as an early form of sustainability. Others point out that leaks, spills, and careless dumping made the process little better than leaving the stuff in the streets. One thing's certain, those men earned every penny of their meager wages, and humor was never far from such indignities. Jokes about chamber pots filled Victorian comedy sketches, cartoons, and even polite dinner chatter. You might chuckle now, but when stepping carefully down a cobblestone street, you quickly learn to keep your mouth shut and your hat tilted low, because you never knew what might splash from a second-story window. As the day wears on, you wander into a poorer district and catch the unmistakable scent of the pail closet system. Tenants shared a single closet where waste was collected in removable pails. These, too, were emptied by workers on regular rounds. Of course, regular was generous, overflow was common, and streets sometimes turned into open sewers. In damp weather, the filth mingled with mud until children splashed through puddles of who knows what. The Victorian idea of a childhood immune system was basically, they'll survive. Or they won't. For the middle and upper classes, servants discreetly whisked away chamber pots each morning. The gentry didn't dirty their hands with such things. Instead, footmen or maids bore the burden, often carrying trays of porcelain pots down winding staircases. To spill one meant humiliation, if not dismissal. Imagine polishing silver in the morning and emptying your employer's chamber pot in the afternoon. It was all part of household duties. By evening, when the streets grew quieter, night soil carts rolled out again. The rickety wheels clattered over stones, barrels sloshed, and the men moved like phantoms through the haze of coal smoke and stench. You'd pull your scarf over your nose as they passed. But the smell lingered long after the cart was gone. And here comes the joke for tonight. In the Victorian era, your nose didn't just guide you to bakeries or flower stalls. It also doubled as an early warning system for what was falling from upstairs windows. Forget dodging pigeons, this was next-level urban survival. By the time you return home, grateful to have avoided an airborne chamber pot disaster, you've got a new appreciation for modern plumbing. Toilets with flush handles and sewage pipes aren't glamorous, but they feel like civilization's crowning achievement compared to balancing on a splintery outhouse bench at midnight, lantern in hand, praying the pit below doesn't overflow. You pause at a washstand, eyeing the bottle on the shelf. Inside sloshes something golden, foamy, and, oddly familiar. Beer. But this isn't for drinking. In the Victorian household, it sometimes doubled as shampoo. You pour a bit over your scalp, rubbing it in with your fingers. The smell is yeasty and sharp, and while you wonder if you'll walk around reeking like a tavern, the Victorians swore by it. They believed the malt and hops made hair stronger and shinier, though one suspects the scent just made you crave bread. Hair washing was not a daily thing. Not even close. For most people, soap and water sufficed only once every couple of weeks. Instead, the head was brushed vigorously to distribute oils and shake out dirt. Brushing, in fact, was practically a religion. Some guides recommended 100 strokes a day, which sounds virtuous until you realize the brush itself was rarely washed. Imagine pulling coal dust through your hair with the same bristles week after week, a perfect little conveyor belt of grime. The mainstream historical fact here is that Victorian hairdressers actually promoted egg yolk as a natural cleanser. It was beaten, applied to the scalp, and rinsed away with lukewarm water. Rich in fats and proteins, egg did leave hair soft and glossy. The downside? If the water was too hot, breakfast was served directly on your head. Omelette bangs, not exactly the fashion statement, a quirky tidbit worth savoring. Some households saved the gray water from cooking pasta or rice and used it as hair rinse. It added starch, which stiffened hair and supposedly helped elaborate styles hold their shape longer. Picture a lady stepping out in curls reinforced by yesterday's macaroni water. Practical? Maybe. Glamorous? Only if no one caught the faint smell of dinner lingering around your bonnet. Historians still argue whether Victorians genuinely believed in these homemade treatments or simply had no alternatives. Some letters from upper-class women describe egg washes and lavender oil rinses as delightful indulgences, while poorer women wrote of boiling rosemary in water just to disguise odors. Was it vanity, tradition, or necessity? The lines blur when soap was harsh, hot water costly, and hair was considered a woman's crowning glory. You sit before a mirror, tugging at tangles with a wide-toothed comb. Hair oil, often made of bear grease, lard, or macassar oil, glistens as you smooth it down. The problem with macassar oil was its enthusiasm. It clung to anything: hands, collars, pillows. To combat this, furniture makers started adding antimacassars, those little lace doilies draped over chair backs. You thought they were just decorative, but no, they were grease traps for your uncle's shiny hair. There's humor here too. People actually complained in newspapers about the invasion of oily head stains in public places. Imagine being scolded for leaving a greasy patch on the church pew. Even etiquette guides pleaded with men to be sparing with the stuff. Apparently, your hairstyle wasn't the only thing macassar could ruin. For the men, the rituals differed. Barbers offered hair tonics that promised everything from dandruff cures to regrowth. Many included alcohol, camphor, or quinine, so at least they smelled medicinal. Whether they worked is another question. Victorian advertising was notorious for bold claims, and hair loss was a lucrative business. If you couldn't grow it back, you could at least slick it into submission. Children's hair was often cropped short, partly for convenience, partly as a defense against lice. But lice still thrived, combed out with fine-toothed metal rakes or drowned with vinegar. In fact, school inspectors sometimes lined children up for communal vinegar rinses, a humiliating yet oddly unifying experience. One can imagine the sour smell wafting through classrooms, mingling with chalk dust and ink. By evening, when your hair is finally rinsed of beer and patted dry with a rough towel, it doesn't exactly smell fresh. But it does shine in the candlelight, and that's enough. You tie it up neatly or brush it until it falls smooth, ready to face another day of soot, sweat, and ash. And if someone teases you about smelling like a brewery, you just shrug. Better that than the lingering scent of boiled cabbage, which clung to many kitchens. Here's the joke for tonight: while you worry about modern dandruff shampoo leaving white flakes on your shoulders, Victorians worried about entire egg whites sliding down their backs if the rinse went wrong. Perspective is everything, and so you step away from the mirror, hair slightly sticky, scalp tingling from vinegar or hops, feeling both clean and faintly ridiculous. In a world where soap was harsh, water scarce, and style demanded effort, Victorians made do with breakfast ingredients and beer barrels. You smooth your hair once more. Slip on your bonnet and head out, knowing tomorrow you'll brush and oil again, but won't see soap and water for weeks. The next chore sneaks into your day without ceremony: laundry. You glance at the basket piled high, and you already know it's a Sisyphean task. Unlike your hair, which you can ignore for weeks at a time, clothes cannot escape the grime of coal smoke, cooking grease, and muddy streets. Yet soap is dear, water must be hauled, and a single shirt can take hours to scrub clean. No wonder Victorians wore the same outfit day after day, sometimes for weeks, before attempting a wash. Wool and cotton were the dominant fabrics. Wool trapped heat and smelled like a wet sheep in the rain, while cotton absorbed sweat and grew stiff with dirt. Linen, if you could afford it, was prized for its relative comfort. But washing was an ordeal. First, water had to be fetched, often bucket by bucket from a well, pump, or river. Then it was heated over a fire, filling the air with steam thick enough to suffocate. Into the scalding vat went lye soap or soda crystals, both caustic enough to eat through fabric if you weren't careful. There's a reason laundry day was dreaded. Women scrubbed garments against washboards until their knuckles bled, rubbed them with harsh blocks of soap, and wrung them dry by hand. Clotheslines sagged across back gardens, fluttering like surrender flags in the sooty air. If rain came, all the effort soured into damp mildew smells. You could almost hear the collective groan of mothers across London when clouds gathered. Mainstream history records that wealthier households hired washerwomen for the dirtiest tasks. These women hauled laundry in great baskets to public washhouses, where large copper vats boiled shirts and linens together. The steam, the sweat, the relentless bending and stirring, contemporaries described washhouses as more punishing than factory floors. Washerwomen were known to suffer scalds, chilblains, and chronic back pain. They often charged by the piece, which meant you could count the laundry as carefully as you counted coins. But here's a quirky detail: some Victorians swore by urine as a stain remover. Ammonia, after all, does wonders against grease. Chamber pots full of the stuff were sometimes sold to laundresses, who used it sparingly on tough marks. Imagine slipping into a freshly cleaned shirt that carried a faint whiff of something not quite floral. Laundry may have looked clean, but it didn't always smell that way. Another odd practice was bluing. Whites, over time, turned a dingy yellow thanks to smoke and sweat. To counter this, laundresses added small amounts of indigo or ultramarine pigment to rinse water, giving the illusion of crisp whiteness. It didn't clean so much as trick the eye. So if you notice the bishop's gleaming collar on Sunday, remember, it may just be artful illusion, not cleanliness. historians debate how often ordinary Victorians really washed their clothes. Some letters suggest that outer garments were brushed and beaten, not washed, to prolong their lifespan. Inner linens, chemises, shirts, drawers, were laundered weekly, since they sat closest to the skin. Yet archaeological digs in working-class districts reveal evidence of chronic lice infestations, suggesting that many simply wore clothes until they were nearly unwearable. Did people truly not notice the smell, or did everyone smell so equally ripe that noses simply adjusted? It's an open question. You kneel over a tub, scrubbing a shirt until your arms ache. The soap stings, your hands are raw, and flecks of lye burn under your nails. Beside you, another shirt simmers in boiling water, the fabric swirling like ghostly laundry soup. A child trots past with a bundle of wet stockings, which are pinned to a line across the kitchen. Soon the whole room drips and steams, as though you've wandered into a rainforest made of smoke and soap. A humorous aside, magazines of the time advised women to avoid conversation with gentlemen while laundering, lest perspiration mar one's modesty. As if you needed reminding not to flirt while elbow-deep in dirty socks. Etiquette manuals could be unintentionally comic, gently scolding readers for things no one would dream of doing. After hours of work, your laundry pile shrinks. You shake out the last sheet and drape it on the line. The smell is sharp, almost medicinal, with hints of soap, ash, and wet wool. It's not fresh in the modern sense. It lacks the spring meadow scent of today's detergents, but it is clean by Victorian standards. And that's enough. By evening, you collapse into a chair, arms heavy, fingers red, but there's a small satisfaction in seeing the linens fluttering like flags of triumph. Tomorrow, once they're dry, you'll iron them with a heavy flat iron heated on the stove, another exhausting step. Laundry, in the Victorian household, was not a day's task. It was a cycle, endless and consuming, shaping the rhythm of life. And here's the joke: when your shirt stiffens after washing because someone forgot to rinse out all the soda crystals, you can at least console yourself. You've just invented Victorian cardboard, so you lean back, watching the laundry sway, steam curling through the kitchen, and think, perhaps this is why so many wore dark, heavy clothes. They didn't show dirt so quickly, and laundry could be postponed another week. In a world where soap was dear and labor relentless, every clean shirt was a minor miracle. You wake to a different morning ritual. Instead of laundry or boiling water, you fumble for lavender water, rose oil, or musk. Outside, coal smoke hangs heavy, but here you stage a battle of aromas. Victorian deodorant didn't exist. People drowned themselves in perfume to mask unwashed bodies. Perfume boomed in 19th century France and Britain. Wealthy Victorians bought Parisian scents, while the working class used diluted lavender water sold by traveling vendors. Ladies dabbed gloves, gentlemen tucked scented handkerchiefs in pockets, even letters were spritzed. People sincerely believed foul smells carried disease, and masking odors felt like self-defense under miasma theory. Historians debate whether perfume was practical or performative. Over-reliance discouraged bathing, but scents projected refinement. Meanwhile, you dab lavender oil behind your ears, sharp and medicinal. Across town, others rub bay rum on their scalps or sprinkle rose water into laundry. If smells are language, Victorians wrote novels in scent. The humor is clear when considering body odor. Theaters, ballrooms, and carriages were stifling with sweat. Perfume rarely won the battle, blending with musk into a unique Victorian cocktail. Bottles were artful status symbols, cut glass, gilded tops, delicate stoppers. Guerlain's Jicky of 1889 quietly mixed synthetics with natural essences. Not all scents were pleasant. London's Great Stink of 1858 mixed perfume with raw sewage, heat, and Thames odor. Some experimented with odorless diets, avoiding garlic or onions, favoring bland foods to sweeten sweat. By now, your sleeves and gloves faintly smell of roses. Stepping into smoky streets where perfume collides with manure, soot, and frying onions, you realize scent isn't just hygiene. It's survival, ritual, and illusion, all bottled in fragile glass. In a world without deodorant, Victorians practically invented the first Axe body spray effect, not for romance, but to prevent fainting in public. You step into a cavernous hall, heavy with steam, echoing with water splashes and chatter. This is a public bathhouse, a hybrid of philanthropy, necessity, and grudging charity. For most working-class families, private bathrooms were fantasies. Bathtubs were luxuries, plumbing rare, and fuel costly. So you, like thousands, clutch a coin, ready for a temporary taste of cleanliness. Public baths spread after the 1846 Public Baths and Washhouses Act, pushed by reformers hoping soap and hot water could prevent disease and moral decay. Buildings often contained pools and rows of individual baths. Some were pristine, others damp and grimy. You climb into your tub, trying to convince yourself this is better than staying dirty. Some towns offered first-class and second-class baths. Extra pennies could buy hotter water, thick towels, or a mirror. The poor shared crowded tubs. Cleanliness remained stratified by class. Historians debate whether baths truly improved health or were temporary relief. Many users came irregularly, sometimes treating them more as social spaces than hygiene facilities. Noise surrounds you, children shrieking, mothers scolding, men grumbling over soap rations. Steam sticks your hair to your forehead, you can't tell if you're sweating or getting clean. Many wash houses doubled as laundry facilities, women scrubbing shirts in copper vats, their voices rising above hissing water. The smell, soap, sweat, damp wool, and iron, etiquette guides warned against undue merriment, but children defy rules, splashing while attendants shake their heads. Posters and soap ads claimed regular bathing preserved health and elevated character, a faintly ironic link between cleanliness and salvation. You leave damp but lighter, skin tingling. Outside, London air slaps your cheeks. Coal smoke and horse manure mingling with the fleeting illusion of purity. One last joke: if modern gyms sell wellness, Victorian baths did the same, except the workout was surviving scalding, soapy water. Cleanliness was communal, negotiated, sometimes humiliating, but deeply human. You settle into a stiff wooden chair as someone presses a pamphlet into your hand. It promises clear skin, fresh breath, boundless energy. If you drink this odd-smelling tonic, rub this ointment, or strap on a humming contraption. Welcome to Victorian Britain's marketplace of quack cures, where medical science, snake oil salesmanship, and desperation mix in a bubbling cauldron. Health reformers and self-styled experts abounded. Germ theory was still gaining ground. Miasma theory, that bad air caused illness, still influenced city planning and perfume use. Countless inventors hawked remedies that often harmed more than helped. A bottle labeled arsenic wafers, sold to women for porcelain skin. Small doses smoothed the complexion, larger doses edged toward the grave. Even Queen Victoria reportedly tried arsenic cosmetics. Then there were electric belts, promising vitality with mild shocks. Vinegar baths claimed to cleanse skin, sharpen the mind, and ward off infection. Stinging, stinky, but popular. Historians debate whether Victorians truly believed these treatments or participated out of ritual. Diaries suggest both. Some faithfully followed regimens, others mocked neighbors' gullibility. Hygiene myths extended to daily life: don't bathe during menstruation, cut hair only on certain moon phases, beware cold baths. Even washing became a maze of rules. Step into an apothecary, glass jars filled with powders and syrups, labels screaming cleanses the blood, or strengthens the nerves. The shop smells of camphor, alcohol, and something sweet. Tonics sometimes contained cocaine or opium, energizing or soothing. Some cures were sinister, some placebo, but all offered comfort and control in a world where disease struck fast. You sip from a brown bottle labeled elixir of life, burning the throat with a sweet, medicinal aftertaste. Alcohol. Laudanum. Unknown. You feel braver, cleaner, if only in imagination. And the joke slips in: if Victorians had late-night TV, a mustachioed salesman would be shouting, "But wait, there's more." While waving an arsenic wafer and an electric belt, hygiene wasn't just soap and water. It was theater, experiment, and sometimes outright scam. Wandering out, vinegar and violets lingering, you realize the Victorian struggle for cleanliness blurred the line between cure and curiosity. The room you step into is hushed, but not peaceful. It's the uneasy quiet of a Victorian hospital ward. The air hangs sour with sweat, damp straw, and the metallic tang of old blood. Clean hospitals? Forget it. In the mid-19th century, cleanliness was more aspiration than reality. Before germ theory, many doctors blamed bad air or patients' constitutions for disease. Surgeons moved from patient to patient without washing hands, instruments were wiped on aprons, pus was considered healthy. Blood-stained aprons became badges of honor. You lie on a thin iron-framed mattress, listening to moans. A nurse replaces a bandage with a strip recycled from another patient. Some hospitals reused straw mattresses. Later sold to the poor, a grim version of pre-owned furniture. Change was coming. Florence Nightingale, during the Crimean War, emphasized fresh air, clean bedding, and sanitation, promoting handwashing and ventilation. Historians debate whether her success was due to reforms or sheer discipline, but survival rates improved. The surgeon enters, sleeves rolled, knives in hand, no mask, no antiseptic. He swigs brandy before beginning, assistants pinning the patient down. Carbolic acid hasn't arrived yet, rotting wounds still scent the ward. Humor appears in flowers brought not for sentiment but to mask gangrene. Buckets of gray water are shared, dabbing one patient then another, an invisible chain of germs. Meals are thin gruel, stale bread, or a spoonful of beer, consumed while someone saws a leg nearby. Still, seeds of modern hygiene sprout here. Nightingale and Lister gradually convinced doctors that invisible organisms, not bad air, spread death. By century's end, antiseptics improved survival. For now, you lie back, smelling faint carbolic soap, a hint of the future. The ward hums with groans, prayers, and rattling coughs. Cleanliness is patchy, improvised, sometimes more dangerous than illness itself, and your joke for this dim-lit ward: at least no hospital gowns flapped open, they didn't exist. Clothes stay on, lice included. Hygiene is coming, but for now, you're in history's waiting room, disinfectant still absent. The smell hits you before the sight does: wet wool, wood smoke, and that unmistakable sting of soap mingled with sweat. It's laundry day in a Victorian household, which means the entire rhythm of the house is upended. Forget meals on time, forget leisure, forget calm conversation. Laundry day is a production, a battlefield, and everyone in the household is conscripted, whether they like it or not. Mainstream history tells us that laundry day was typically once a week in middle and upper-class homes, and sometimes once every 2 or 3 weeks in poorer families. Why? Because it took an entire day, or 2, or 3, to wash, boil, scrub, rinse, starch, wring, dry, and iron. Just listing the steps feels exhausting. You can almost hear the sigh of every Victorian housewife as Monday dawned. Knowing the drudgery ahead, you begin by hauling water. Buckets upon buckets, drawn from a pump, dragged across yards, and poured into heavy copper boilers set over fires. The heat soon fills the kitchen, steaming up the windows until they drip with condensation. Women stoke the fire with coal or wood, sweating before the real work has even started. Into the vat goes soap, hard, lye-based bars shaved into curls, and soda crystals, each promising to strip dirt but also tough on fabric and skin. Clothes are sorted, whites boiled, colored fabrics washed separately to avoid bleeding, wool treated with wary hands lest it shrink into doll-sized sweaters. Garments are scrubbed against wooden washboards, pounded with laundry bats, or twisted until water streams out. Your knuckles redden and sting, nails catch on fabric, and the skin on your hands begins to peel. Laundry is less a household chore than an endurance sport. Quirky practices pop up everywhere. Bluing, for example, adding little lumps of indigo or ultramarine to rinse water so that yellowed linen looked whiter. Or starching collars so stiff they could practically double as small weapons. Starch was boiled into thick paste, brushed onto fabric, and ironed until the shirt front stood like a board. A well-starched collar was the hallmark of respectability, even if it left your neck rubbed raw by the end of the day. Historians still argue whether laundry was more dreaded than cooking in Victorian homes. Some diaries suggest women complained more about the endless cycle of washing and ironing than they did about preparing meals. Others note that communal wash houses relieved some pressure for the working poor, though those were often crowded, loud, and only available in larger towns. Was laundry truly the worst household burden, or just the most visible? That debate lingers in the margins of domestic history. The drying stage was its own saga. Clotheslines stretched across yards, rooftops, or even indoors across kitchens. Damp garments dripped onto stone floors, filled rooms with musty smells, and refused to dry in England's famously damp climate. In winter, drying could take days, leaving shirts stiff, sour, and faintly moldy. A sudden rainstorm meant hauling everything inside, muttering curses, and watching days of work sour into disappointment. Then came ironing. Heavy flat irons, some weighing nearly 10 pounds, were heated directly on stoves. Handle cloths were used to avoid burns, but accidents were common: scorched hands, scorched fabric, scorch marks that never quite faded. The hiss of steam. The thump of irons, the smell of singed linen, it was the soundscape of every Victorian laundry room. And unlike today's quick glide of an electric iron, Victorians had to keep multiple irons heating in rotation, swapping them as they cooled. It was a slow, sweaty dance of muscle and monotony. A humorous aside, magazines of the time advised women to sing hymns or recite poetry while ironing, as if verse could somehow distract from the weight of the iron or the sweat pouring down your back. Imagine reciting Ode to a Nightingale while trying not to brand a permanent triangle into your husband's best shirt. The social side of laundry day shouldn't be overlooked either. Servants in wealthier homes bore the brunt, rising before dawn to begin the work. In poorer households, neighbors sometimes banded together, scrubbing side by side at communal pumps, gossiping over washtubs. Laundry was backbreaking, but it was also one of the few moments women might steal for conversation, complaint, or laughter. You pause, leaning on your washboard, hands raw and aching. Around you, shirts drip from rafters, stockings curl over chairs, sheets flutter like flags of surrender. The house smells like a strange blend of soap, starch, smoke, and damp wool. It is both suffocating and oddly comforting, a rhythm repeated week after week, year after year. And here's the inevitable joke: in a way, Victorian laundry was the original full-body workout. Squats with heavy buckets, arm reps with washboards, endurance with flat irons. If you had survived laundry day, you didn't need a gym membership, you already had biceps like a dockworker. By nightfall, the baskets of wet laundry are lighter, the fires burned low, and the irons clump back into their places. But the work doesn't end. Tomorrow, the dry clothes must be folded, mended, and put away. Laundry day bleeds into laundry week. The cycle never truly stops. You fall into bed with the smell of soap still clinging to your skin, dreaming of a world where clothes wash themselves, something future generations will finally invent. You step into the kitchen, where the clatter of pots and hiss of boiling water fills every corner. Cooking in a Victorian household was a battlefield of hygiene, stretching a budget, feeding a family, and navigating a world without refrigeration, limited germ knowledge, and daily smoke and soot. The kitchen smells of grease, coal, and hours-old stews, a sensory assault for modern chefs. Victorians cooked over open hearths or coal stoves, making temperature control tricky. Meats were boiled, roasted, or fried, but cross-contamination was common. Knives, boards, and spoons were reused, flour dusted surfaces, sugar drew flies, and leftovers sat at room temperature. Bacteria thrived, even if no one knew it. In wealthier homes, kitchens were separate, ventilated rooms. In smaller households, cooking shared space with living areas. Stirring stew often meant dodging children, laundry, and coal ash. Garlic, rosemary, and thyme were used not only for flavor but also to sanitize and possibly preserve food. Historians debate whether Victorian kitchens were truly dangerous. Some letters praise careful hand-washing, scalding pots, and vinegar washes. Others describe outbreaks of foodborne disease among the poor. Victorian cooks were sometimes heroes, sometimes unwitting vectors of illness. Scrubbing soot-blackened pots leaves your hands smelling of metal. Even a mist fleck of residue could attract maggots. Flour, sugar, and leftover porridge, though seemingly harmless, bred bacteria quickly. Etiquette guides advised avoiding sneezes in the food, a challenge in smoky kitchens. Food preservation relied on icehouses, cellars, cold streams, or methods like salting, pickling, and smoking. Milk was sometimes boiled, pasteurization was rare. Copper and tin utensils could react with acidic foods, adding metallic taste, or worse. Every meal balanced nutrition, taste, and survival. By evening, the kitchen is scrubbed clean, ashes swept, and yesterday's stew fades into night air. Cooking in the Victorian household was hygiene, science, and ritual combined, a battle, a small victory over filth and decay. Joke aside, modern chefs worry about Michelin stars. Victorian cooks worried if their stew survived the day without becoming a bacterial buffet. They didn't just cook, they gambled with history, one pot at a time. You wander into the bedroom, where linens and mattresses dominate the space like silent sentinels. In Victorian homes, hygiene here was intimate, tactile, and a little terrifying. Beds were central to daily life. People ate, dressed, and sometimes worked in them, while bedding rituals were elaborate, repetitive, and often futile. Mattresses were stuffed with straw or horsehair. Feather beds were a luxury. Straw compressed quickly, absorbed sweat, and harbored insects. Feathers trapped dust mites and fleas. Bed frames were wooden and dusty. Sheets changed infrequently, once a week for the wealthy, once a month, or less, for the poor. Linen carried sweat, skin flakes, and countless microscopic guests. You run a hand across the sheet, feeling rough straw beneath, a faint odor of damp, smoke, and something indefinable. Smallpox or influenza outbreaks make you wonder how these beds spread disease. Some sprinkled camphor or lavender, others shook beds thrice or tucked herbs beneath pillows, hoping scents warded off lice, fleas, or cholera. Effectiveness is debatable, but the rituals offered comfort. Bedmaking was a ceremony, sheets beaten, mattresses aired in the sun, feather beds fluffed. Tightly tucked sheets signaled order, virtue, and self-respect. Wealthy beds held dozens of blankets and quilts. Children sometimes buried under 7 layers risked nightly suffocation. Pillows, rarely cleaned, harbored mites and dust until late 19th century reforms improved hygiene. By evening, you pull covers around you, inhaling lavender, straw, and lingering hearth smoke. Sleep is an act of trust in ritual, scent, and luck. Modern bed bugs seem tame compared to Victorian children sharing mattresses with siblings, pets, and a few hundred uninvited insects. You sink into the pillow, feeling the mattress give under your weight, the straw crunching faintly. Beds were the ultimate intersection of hygiene, survival, and human ingenuity. The morning sunlight drifts lazily through your window, but you barely notice. Your focus is elsewhere, on teeth, hair, and that strange, intimate concern, personal grooming. You realize that oral hygiene, in particular, was a battlefield the Victorians approached with a mix of earnestness, superstition, and whatever ingredients were handy. Brushing teeth, flossing, or rinsing was far from uniform, and the products themselves ranged from mildly effective to outright bizarre. Mainstream history shows that toothbrushes were becoming more widely available by the mid-19th century. Early models had bristles made from boar hair attached to handles of wood or bone. Toothpaste, or dentifrice, existed in powders, pastes, or liquids, often flavored with chalk, charcoal, or herbs. Brushing wasn't necessarily a daily habit. Many people only cleaned their teeth before social events or church services. The link between oral health and disease was not yet fully understood, leaving the mouth as both a cosmetic and hygienic concern. You pick up a brush, the stiff bristles pricking your gums. In wealthier households, teeth cleaning was accompanied by scented powders, sometimes mixed with soap or even vinegar. In working-class homes, the options were limited: brick dust, chalk, or ashes. The taste is bitter, gritty, and abrasive, but the belief in its cleansing power is firm. Your gums sting. Your tongue recoils, but you soldier on, because oral hygiene is both a social and moral obligation. Quirky practices add color to the routine. Some Victorians rinsed their mouths with wine, believing the alcohol killed germs or, at the very least, improved breath. Others chewed sticks of aromatic wood or sugar-coated pastilles to freshen their mouths. There are records of people swabbing their gums with powdered charcoal or using ground-up shells as abrasive cleaning agents. Modern dentistry would shudder, but they were trying. Historians still argue how much these practices actually prevented dental disease. Archaeological studies reveal widespread tooth decay and gum infections, even among those who diligently brushed or used powder. The effectiveness of brushing with coarse powders is debated. It likely removed debris but could erode enamel over time. The line between ritual, cosmetic, and health measure is blurry, and the debate continues. Haircare was similarly complex. Hairbrushes, combs, and oils were used obsessively, partly for aesthetics, partly to stave off lice. Women often spent hours washing and styling hair with infusions of herbs, flowers, or even beer. Men's grooming routines were shorter but still involved combing, oiling, and trimming facial hair. Bathing, when it occurred, often involved scrubbing hair with soap, but heavy oils were reapplied to maintain sheen, even if it attracted dust and smoke. A humorous aside, a guidebook recommended brushing one's hair in the morning to stimulate the brain, suggesting a link between hygiene and intelligence. Imagine rising bleary-eyed, flicking your hair with vigor, and expecting brilliance to follow. It didn't, but at least your hair looked disciplined. You notice a lingering problem: fleas, lice, and other pests. Victorian homes were notoriously difficult to keep free of them. Comb-through routines, vinegar washes, and scented powders helped, but infestations were persistent. You carefully combed through your hair, flicking out small insects, and realized that grooming was as much a battle as it was a ritual. Foot care, too, received attention, especially for the middle class. Leather boots were polished, socks changed regularly, and a soak in warm water was considered a luxury. Yet, for the poor, shoes were often worn until holes appeared, socks reused until threadbare, and washing was irregular at best. Hygiene was tightly linked to wealth, as it always seemed to be. By evening, after teeth brushed, hair oiled and combed, and fingers pruned from repeated washing, you stand before a mirror. The reflection is only partly your own. It carries the scent of lavender, the stiffness of starch, and the faint grit of soap and ash. You are clean, by Victorian standards, but also marked by effort, ritual, and the limitations of your age. And the joke that sticks in your mind: if modern influencers promote morning routines to achieve enlightenment, imagine how a Victorian would feel after 3 hours of brushing, combing, oiling, polishing, and powdering. Awake, yes, but probably ready to faint from exhaustion. Hygiene here is performance, survival, and theater, all rolled into one exhausting morning. You exhale, feeling the faint sparkle of cleanliness, aware that tomorrow, it all begins again. The rituals, the potions, the scrubbing, the scents, they are the invisible scaffolding holding up Victorian life. Evening falls, and you trudge down narrow, cobblestone streets, the air a dense mixture of smoke, soot, and whatever humanity has contributed today. Despite laundry, baths, tonics, and teeth brushing, hygiene remains a negotiation between aspiration and reality. You realize that cleanliness in the Victorian era isn't about perfection, it's about effort, invention, and, often, sheer imagination. Each step through the city streets reminds you how limited water supply, coal smoke, and overcrowding shaped daily life. Mainstream history emphasizes that urban planning, sanitation reforms, and public health campaigns gradually transformed life. The introduction of piped water, sewer systems, and public baths improved conditions dramatically by the late 19th century. Yet progress was uneven. Poverty, industrialization, and dense housing meant that even in the modern parts of London or Manchester, outbreaks of cholera, typhoid, and influenza were common. Cleanliness was aspirational, but survival often depended on tolerance and improvisation. You notice signs of ingenuity everywhere. People carry sponges or towels, perfume vials, and little bottles of vinegar or alcohol. Children swing improvised washcloths at each other, women hang damp sheets across narrow alleyways to dry, and men carefully polish boots while keeping an eye on the next streetcar. Hygiene isn't a solitary activity. It's communal, visible, and sometimes theatrical. A quirky tidbit: some households maintained hairballs, collections of combings and cuttings gathered over months. These were sometimes used to stuff cushions, insulate walls, or even repel vermin. The idea of reusing body hair seems odd today, but in a world of limited resources, nothing went to waste. Historians still argue how effective these daily routines actually were in preventing disease. Archaeological and epidemiological evidence shows that even the wealthiest Victorians suffered from illness and infection. Still, the combination of effort, ritual, and emerging scientific knowledge laid the foundation for modern hygiene. You might wonder, were these routines futile, or were they the stepping stones to the cleaner, safer world we inhabit today? The debate lingers. You reflect on the sensory collage of the day, the smell of coal and horse manure mixed with lavender and camphor, the grit of washing clothes and scrubbing floors, the warmth of baths and the sting of soap. Each act, from brushing teeth to boiling laundry, carried lessons in discipline, endurance, and adaptation. It's a strange intimacy with dirt, an awareness of vulnerability, and a commitment to the illusion, and sometimes reality, of cleanliness. One final humorous aside: if you think modern hygiene is exhausting, remember that a Victorian might rise before dawn, haul water, boil clothes, scrub floors, bake bread, polish boots, wash themselves and the children, brush teeth, style hair, and still have time to complain about their neighbors. Their reward? A faint whiff of lavender in a city that still smells like soot, sewage, and ambition. As night deepens, you pause before entering your home, the doors of which have been meticulously swept and scented with herbs. The day's work, ritual, and effort settle into quiet satisfaction. Cleanliness in the Victorian era isn't just about washing, it's about negotiating survival, aesthetics, social expectation, and personal pride, all under conditions that modern sensibilities would call extreme. You sink into bed, remembering laundry, baths, perfumed powders, tonics, and hairbrushes. The day's sensory collage lingers, a gentle cacophony of smells, textures, and exertion. For a moment, you appreciate the ingenuity, resilience, and occasional absurdity of those who lived then. Hygiene was never perfect, but it was a living, breathing testament to human creativity and determination. Now, let your mind drift. Imagine the streets emptying as gas lamps flicker, smoke curling toward the stars. The bustle of laundry, cooking, bathing, and brushing recedes like waves retreating from the shore. You feel the day's sensations soften, the grit under fingernails, the sting of soap, the sharp aroma of coal smoke all fade into a gentle memory. The lavender, the rosewater, the faint tang of boiled linens linger only as whispers. Breathe deeply, slowly, and imagine the warmth of a hearth. Feel the straw mattress, the folds of linen, and the softness of a worn pillow. The air, heavy earlier, now hums with calm. You notice how quiet it has become, how safe the home feels despite the imperfections of the past. The rituals you witnessed, as exhausting and strange as they were, carry a human heartbeat, care, pride, and resilience intertwined in every sweep of a broom, every scrub of a washboard, every dab of perfume. Visualize the gentle rise and fall of the night, the dim light spilling through windows, and the slow settling of dust. Let your thoughts soften. Each act of Victorian hygiene, whether mundane or bizarre, reminds you that even in the harshest conditions, humans seek comfort, dignity, and a measure of control. You are safe now, observing rather than enduring. Let your eyes grow heavy. Imagine the lavender sachets, the warm bath water, the sun-dried linens, the carefully brushed hair, all blending into a quiet, rhythmic lullaby. With each breath, you drift further into calm, releasing the tension of modern life and stepping softly into the past. Let the day dissolve, and feel yourself at rest, carried gently by history's soft, persistent hum.